He smiled at children, juggled at parties, and painted cheerful clowns in garish color. To neighbors he was generous, a contractor who fixed roofs, who hosted summer block parties, who dressed as Pogo the Clown for charity events. Behind the smile, beneath a tidy roof and a perfectly mowed lawn, lay a secret so dark it would shock a nation. Please help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. On a cold December night in 1978, police following a small lead would peel back a curtain on a house where dozens of young men had vanished and where the ground under a suburban living room hid human remains. What followed was one of the most chilling portraits of a predator America had ever seen. A man who lived two lives, who performed for his community while committing atrocities in secrecy. He would later confess to dozens of murder crimes that rewrote how investigators, families, and a shaken public understood the face of evil. John Wayne Gacy was born in 1942. Raised in a household that, by several accounts, included a harsh father and a troubled adolescence. He moved from a boy to a man carrying bruises to his self-image, perhaps, and later, to the way he presented himself to the world. As he grew older, he learned the scripts people expected: charm, helpfulness, civic involvement. He learned how to be likable. He learned to hide. By the 1970s, Gacy lived in suburban Chicago. He ran a small contracting business, hosted large neighborhood gatherings, and cultivated relationships with local politicians, business owners, and families. He performed at fundraising events as Pogo the Clown, a neighborhood figure of laughter. He had a house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue, an unremarkable ranch-style home with a basement, a driveway, a yard. 4 years, Gacy's outward life fit the description of an upstanding citizen. But another thread ran parallel and unseen. Gacy sought the company of young men and teenage boys. Some he hired for casual labor, some he met at clubs, others he encountered walking alone or hitchhiking. Patterns emerged. He would offer work or rides, sometimes use deceit, a phony police badge, a pretense of official business, and lure victims into his car and his home. Those who vanished were not famous, and their disappearances did not at first connect into a single coherent story. Families searched, friends feared, and a community continued its ordinary life unaware that the house down the street might be a crime scene. The people taken were young teens and men in their early 20s. They had names, jobs, futures. They laughed, worried, argued with parents, hoped. Each disappearance was a life interrupted. Each missing person a story that mattered. Over time, investigators would confirm dozens of victims tied to that small home, the number shocking investigators and the public alike. Ultimately, Gacy would be found to have murdered 33 young men and teenage boys, a count that would form the basis of his conviction. To describe the crime is to travel carefully between facts and humanity, between what happened and the people who suffered. The core pattern, as revealed in interviews, court testimony, and Gacy's own statements, combined careful grooming, violent control, and concealment. Gacy typically targeted young men who were vulnerable: transient youth, runaways, one searching for steady work or a safe place to sleep. He used his physical stature, his authoritative talk, and sometimes a phony badge to reassure or intimidate. Once he secured the victim's trust through promises of employment or by offering a ride, he brought him to his home. There, behind a closed door, violence and domination occurred. The exact sequence varied, but sexual assault, restraint, and ultimately murder were often components of what followed. Gacy's tactics sometimes involved playing the part of an authority figure. Several victims recounted feeling deceived, believing Gacy was a person they could rely on. That manipulation of trust, the exploit of kindness, the camouflage of community service is central to understanding his cruelty. The clown persona was paradoxical. He appeared harmless and even comical, and in that dissonance lay a brilliant camouflage. People love clowns at parties, they do not suspect murder. That was part of his concealment. Many of the murders occurred inside Gacy's home. The basement, the crawlspace under the house, became a cold, secret burial place. Evidence collected by police would later yield the remains of many victims in those cramped spaces. Human lives reduced to fragments of bone and story, hidden beneath floorboards. The horror of such concealment is twofold: the violence of the act, and the decision to bury the bodies within the fabric of his daily life. Families and investigators later discovered remains both under the home and nearby grounds, and some victims were later found in other locations associated with Gacy. Experts who study serial offenders identify a cycle: fantasy, grooming, control, violence, and then concealment. In Gacy's case, that cycle appears in striking clarity. He rehearsed normalcy in public, while privately enacting control and permanent silence. Over time, the killings increased in frequency, a common trajectory called escalation. As predators succeed at evading detection, their confidence grows. Their need to act on internal compulsions intensifies. For the victims, there was no pattern that guaranteed safety. A job offer could be a last kindness, a last conversation. Investigations often turn on small threads. In Gacy's case, a missing person complaint, a young man last seen heading toward Gacy's direction, and the persistence of families pushed officers to dig deeper. A separate event, a report of sexual assault or attempted luring, produced a tangible lead: suspicion of a man using a badge to impersonate police. As police pieced together witness accounts and connected patterns of disappearances, a warrant was sought and obtained to search Gacy's home. On December 21, 1978, law enforcement arrested John Wayne Gacy after evidence mounted and a warrant allowed access to his property. Once inside, investigators found evidence of violence and human remains. The crawlspace beneath the house yielded remains wrapped or concealed. Other remains were found elsewhere on his property. The scale of what investigators discovered, the number of bodies, the manner of burial made clear that they were facing a prolific killer, not an isolated offender. Few cases combine suburban ordinariness and mass atrocity so closely. It changed the way the region viewed safety and trust. Forensic scientists and detectives faced the daunting task of identifying remains, matching missing person reports, and building a legal case that would hold in court. Over months and years, bones were cataloged, dental records compared, and families were notified. Identification is painstaking and often painful work for everyone involved. The closure it offers is incomplete and never fully heals, but it is essential. Even today, a number of victims recovered in the Gacy case remain unidentified, a final, lingering wound for families and authorities. Investigators sought two things: proof of what happened and why. Motive in a serial killer is rarely singular. It is complex, often rooted in psychological compulsion, past trauma, sexual pathology, and a desire for control. Gacy eventually confessed to many of the murders during interviews with police, sometimes recounting details of the crimes and where remains were located. His confessions helped close many missing person cases and offered investigators crucial specifics that forensic work alone could not provide. Still, confession does not make the motive simple. It illuminates the actions, but it rarely offers a full, satisfying explanation of inner torment. As news spread, the community reacted in shock, disbelief, and anger. People who had waved to the man called Pogo at parades now looked at photos and replayed memories through a new lens. Trust in familiar faces eroded. The investigation invited public reflection on how predators can hide in plain sight, how charisma and community involvement may mask monstrous behavior. In the court of public opinion, one question often repeated itself: how could so many people be fooled for so long? The legal process that followed aimed to balance the needs of justice, the rights of the accused, and the weight of evidence. Gacy was tried in 1980. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the catalog of remains recovered from his property and elsewhere. The jury heard the human cost of the crimes, families' grief, remains identified, and the pattern of deceit and violence. Gacy was convicted of multiple counts of murder ultimately linked to the deaths of 33 young men and boys. The conviction was a legal acknowledgement of the crimes and a measure of accountability for families seeking answers. Gacy was sentenced to death. His appeals and motions would follow the complex, years-long process typical of capital cases in the United States. During his time on death row, Gacy painted and sold artwork, including images of clowns, generating controversy about the ownership and market for murderabilia. The ethical questions raised about profiting from notoriety, about the dignity of victims' families, continued to reverberate beyond the legal sphere. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. The execution was not without drama. Reports describe complications during the procedure and crowds outside the prison. For some, the execution signaled closure. For others, it reopened grief and reignited questions about capital punishment, showmanship, and what justice truly means for victims' families. The images of a crowd gathered outside a correctional center, some celebrating, some protesting, captured how complicated and raw the public response remained. The families of the victims continued to live with absence. Some found limited solace in convictions. Others longed for names for unidentified remains. Communities sought to rebuild trust, implement better protections for youth, and prevent predators from exploiting goodwill and vulnerability. The Gacy case also prompted law enforcement changes. better interdepartmental communication across jurisdictions, improved missing person protocols, and a deeper appreciation for how serial predation can cross county and state lines. Even decades later, some questions hang in the air. A small number of remains remain unidentified. There are unanswered specifics about some suspected victims and peripheral leads. That unfinished business is itself a form of aftermath. A reminder that, in some ways, crime never fully closes. It moves into memory and into the slow work of identification and healing. When we study killers, their motives, their methods, and their minds, we're not doing so out of morbid fascination alone. We study to understand patterns, to protect the vulnerable, and to honor the people who were taken. The story of John Wayne Gacy is not merely a list of acts. It is a portrait of how charisma can hide cruelty, how ordinary settings can become sites of horror, and how communities must remain vigilant without becoming paranoid. Psychologically, what we see in Gacy is the lethal combination of grooming, power, and concealment. He used social masks, charm, community work, clowning to lower suspicion. He targeted vulnerability. He sought control, and he buried the evidence of his control beneath the floorboards of a life otherwise unremarkable. While experts can point to childhood trauma, personality disorder markers, or paraphilic patterns, none of those explanations absolve the choices he made. They only illuminate the pathology. For the families, the takeaways are personal and persistent. Grief that doesn't end with a verdict, questions that survive decades. For investigators and policymakers, the Gacy case reinforced a lesson: connection matters. Sharing information, listening to families, following small leads, those are the threads that catch even the most careful predators. And for us, the watchers and narrators, there is a duty. Tell the story with care. Place the victims at the center. Reject salaciousness and focus on consequence. Each person taken had a name, a laugh, a plan, and each deserves to be remembered as more than a statistic. If this story leaves you with one lingering thought, let it be this: evil sometimes wears a friendly face. Our job is to look twice, to listen when people disappear, and to insist that the vulnerable be protected with urgency, compassion, and persistent curiosity.